"You're a disgrace to this place." The words sliced through the air like a knife as a hand slammed onto the table. Jason stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. The bustling sounds of the restaurant, the clattering of dishes, the chatter of other patrons, suddenly faded and all eyes turned toward the scene unfolding. Jason, the young black waiter, had been subjected to insults before, but this was different. This time the words weren't just meant to hurt, they were meant to break him. The customer, a wealthy middle-aged man in a tailored suit, glared at him with venom. "I said this is terrible service. What kind of idiot do you have working here? I demand a manager now." He sneered, gesturing angrily toward Jason as if he were nothing more than an object to be discarded. The man's voice was loud, cutting through the stillness of the room. Jason stood still, his back straight, his face a mask of controlled emotion. His eyes met the man's, unwavering, though his insides were screaming with frustration. He had been humiliated countless times before by people like this. The ones who thought their money and status gave them the right to treat others like dirt. But today something inside him was different. Today he wasn't going to take it. He took a deep breath, steadied his nerves, and walked toward the manager who had just entered the scene, his eyes flickering nervously between the rude customer and Jason. Jason had worked in the restaurant industry for years, hopping from one job to the next, scraping by to make ends meet. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a living. And for him, it was the best he could do, being the breadwinner for his family after his father passed away. He was used to the grind, the long hours on his feet, the endless shift changes, and the high expectations. It was a job that demanded everything but offered little in return. But the disrespect? That was another thing. Being a black man in the service industry often meant being overlooked, dismissed, and treated as less than. He had been on the receiving end of countless insults over the years, subtle comments about his hair, his accent, his very presence. But he'd learned to swallow his pride and keep his head down. After all, he needed this job. His family depended on him. He had learned to adapt. If he wanted to keep his job, he couldn't let the casual racism or the hurtful words get to him. But today, in front of the entire restaurant, in front of the people who had witnessed the customer's cruelty, he felt something inside him snap. Today, he wasn't going to play the role of the silent worker. The man's insults weren't the first. There had been others, too many to count. The woman who'd called him the help when he offered to take her order. The man who had refused to let him serve his table because he didn't want a black waiter. Jason had learned to smile through it all, to keep moving forward with his head down. But today this customer, this man who had no respect for him or anyone else in the room, had gone too far. He could feel the anger building inside him, but it wasn't just the anger that hurt. It was the humiliation, the constant reminder that to some people he would never be good enough. They saw his uniform and assumed he was less than human. They saw his skin and assumed he was less than them. He had always swallowed those feelings, pushed them down so deep inside, but today he couldn't. Jason made his way to the manager, his jaw clenched as he fought to hold it together. The customer's words echoed in his head, taunting him, threatening to break him down. But as he approached the manager, he felt a surge of power he hadn't expected. He was done being the invisible worker, done being the object of someone else's frustration. He told the manager about the incident, his voice steady despite the fury coursing through him. "I'm sorry, but this man has crossed the line," Jason said, his eyes never leaving the rude customer's table. "I'm done taking this kind of treatment." The manager nodded quickly, offering an apologetic smile to the customer. "I'll handle this right away," he said, but Jason could see the fear in his eyes. The manager was more concerned with keeping the customer happy than addressing the mistreatment Jason had endured. But then, something inside Jason hardened. He had been treated like this too many times to count, by too many people who thought they were better than him. And today he wasn't going to let anyone take his dignity. Not anymore. The manager stepped up, putting a hand on Jason's shoulder, offering a tight smile. "I'm so sorry, sir. We'll take care of this immediately," he said, his voice cool and apologetic. But Jason could see it in his eyes, the fear of losing a paying customer. He could feel his own rage boiling over, but he didn't want to cause a scene. He just wanted the man to leave, to stop making him feel less than. But then the customer did something that pushed Jason to the brink. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and looked down at Jason one last time with disgust. "Maybe you should learn how to do your job properly. I'll make sure your boss hears about this," the man sneered before walking out of the restaurant. Jason stood there, shaking, his hands clenched into fists by his sides. He had been humiliated again, made to feel small in front of everyone. But as the door swung closed behind the rude customer, something shifted inside him. The words that had kept him silent for so long were on the verge of spilling out. He had been silent for years, but not anymore. Jason stood in the quiet aftermath, shaking as the rude customer's final words echoed in his mind. He had taken it for too long. His patience, his dignity, everything had been stretched thin by years of mistreatment. But today was different. Today, Jason wasn't the quiet, invisible waiter. He wasn't the one who let people walk all over him. No, this time the tables were about to turn. As the door swung closed behind the disrespectful customer, the restaurant's atmosphere slowly began to return to its usual hum. People went back to eating, talking, laughing, but Jason couldn't move. His body was still rigid, his heart pounding in his chest. He stood in the middle of the restaurant, the sting of humiliation still fresh in the air, but something inside him had changed. He could feel it, a flicker of power, a sliver of hope. For the first time in years, Jason was done being the quiet servant. Done with the system that treated him as less than. He could still hear the man's voice in his head, "Learn how to do your job properly." It felt like an insult not just to his skills, but to his very humanity. It wasn't just about the job. It was the years of injustice he'd swallowed. It was about the fact that, as a black man, Jason had been made to feel invisible in a world where every flaw was magnified, every mistake scrutinized, and every success stolen. And today he wasn't letting anyone take that away from him. Jason's mind raced as he slowly walked back to the service station, the customer's eyes still lingering on him. He hadn't realized how much attention the scene had drawn until now. They were all watching him, some with pity, others with curiosity. But not one person had stood up for him. Not one person had said a word when the customer had humiliated him. It was a familiar feeling, one he'd grown used to. The silence of the bystanders. The quiet acceptance of racism. People didn't want to make waves. But Jason wasn't in the mood to be invisible anymore. The manager, who had been standing nervously nearby, approached him after a moment. His face was a mask of practiced politeness, but Jason could see the hint of discomfort in his eyes. "I'm really sorry about what happened," he said, his voice soft. "I'll have a word with him. He won't be coming back here." Jason looked at him, his thoughts conflicted. He didn't want the manager's sympathy. He didn't want empty apologies. It was all too familiar. People said the right things, but nothing ever changed. The system never changed. He had dealt with this in every job he'd had, and nothing ever got better. "No, it's not enough," Jason said, his voice low but firm. The manager blinked, clearly taken aback. "You think telling me that he won't come back fixes this? Do you know what it's like to be treated like garbage day in and day out? It's not just him, it's the system that lets people like him get away with it." The manager took a step back, eyes widening. He seemed caught off guard by Jason's outburst. For a moment, the air in the room hung heavy, and Jason could feel his pulse quickening. But he didn't care anymore. He was tired of being ignored, tired of being dismissed. He had been treated like this for so long, but not anymore. "I'm tired of apologizing for things that are out of my control," Jason continued. "I'm tired of being the one who gets overlooked, the one who gets mistreated because of the color of my skin. You think this is just about one customer? No. It's about every customer, every boss, every person who thinks they can walk all over me because I'm black and I work in a restaurant." The manager stood there in silence, his face unreadable. He wasn't used to this kind of confrontation, Jason could tell. He had probably spent years managing this restaurant with a false sense of control, placating both customers and employees. But Jason wasn't going to let him off the hook. The restaurant was starting to empty out, the late lunch crowd fading away, leaving only a few lingering tables. Jason took a deep breath and turned to walk back to the service area, where his co-workers were still nervously going about their business, avoiding eye contact. They were used to the way things worked here, quiet, passive, never making waves. But Jason wasn't willing to stay silent anymore. As he moved behind the bar to grab a rag and wipe down the counter, he noticed a figure standing at the door. It was one of the regulars, a middle-aged woman who frequented the restaurant and always seemed to have an opinion on everything. She caught his eye, and for the first time she didn't look away. "Hey," she called out to him softly. "You all right?" Jason stopped for a moment, surprised. She was the first person who had acknowledged what had happened. For a moment he thought about brushing her off, but instead he nodded. "Yeah, just tired. You know how it is." The woman came up to the bar, leaning against it. "I saw what happened with that guy. He's been rude to a few of us before. And I'm sorry you had to deal with that. No one should talk to you like that." Her voice was low, but there was something genuine in it. Jason couldn't help but feel a pang of gratitude. It wasn't much, just words, But in a place where people were quick to look away, it felt like a small victory. "Thanks," he said, wiping his hands on the rag. "But it's not just about him. It's the whole thing. I've had enough of this." The woman nodded, her eyes sympathetic. "You should talk to someone. Tell them what's been going on. It's not just that one customer. It's the way they think they can treat people like you. Like we don't matter." Jason looked at her, his frustration starting to melt away just a little. It had been so long since anyone had said anything like that to him, and it felt like the first flicker of real support. He nodded, trying to hold back the tears that suddenly threatened to spill. "Maybe I will," he said, his voice quieter now, more determined. "Maybe it's time to do something about it." As Jason cleaned up the last of the tables, the manager walked back toward him, this time with a different look in his eyes. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began cautiously, "and I want to make it right. I can't promise the world, but maybe it's time we started looking at how we handle these situations. We can't let things like this slide anymore." Jason looked at him for a long moment. Could this be real? Was the manager finally ready to step up? Or was this just another empty apology, another meaningless gesture? Before Jason could respond, the manager continued, "But we're going to need some help from you, if you want things to change." Jason swallowed hard, the weight of the moment settling in. This could be his chance to make real change, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been overlooked, ignored, and treated like less than. But was it too late? And would anyone actually stand behind him this time? Jason stood in the back of the restaurant, eyes scanning the room, his mind reeling from everything that had happened. The feeling of having finally spoken up, of not allowing himself to be trampled upon anymore, was still settling in his bones. It was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. The manager had promised change, but Jason couldn't afford to hold his breath. He had seen too many promises before, too many empty words meant to placate him. Today had been a wake-up call. It wasn't enough for him to just survive. He needed to thrive. The next day, as he walked into work, Jason's resolve only grew stronger. The rude customer from yesterday had left him with a burning desire for change, but now it was about to get personal. He had done his part, he had spoken up. But what about everyone else who had been silenced over the years? What about the others who worked in the shadows, bearing the brunt of systemic oppression, waiting for someone to make the first move? Jason couldn't help but feel a weight in his chest, the burden of knowing that he was just one man. But that didn't stop him. One man was often enough to start a revolution. He wasn't going to stand by anymore while others stayed silent. He wasn't going to let this be just another day of his life where he was walked all over. He wasn't going to settle for being invisible anymore. The day passed slowly, the atmosphere in the restaurant unusually tense. Jason found himself eyeing his co-workers, wondering if they too felt the growing pressure of this invisible system that had kept them all in check for so long. As the evening dinner rush began, the restaurant started to fill up with customers, the clinking of silverware and the murmur of conversation blending with the soft background music. Jason moved between the tables, but his mind wasn't on the customers. His mind was on something bigger. And then it happened. Just as the dinner rush hit its peak, a familiar figure walked into the restaurant. It was the same customer who had humiliated Jason yesterday, the man with the tailored suit, the arrogant sneer. The one who had publicly torn him apart in front of everyone. He was back, holding a small woman by his side, looking just as self-important as ever. Jason's stomach turned, and for a moment, his heart dropped. This was his chance to stand up, to take control, but it was easier said than done. Jason's thoughts were a blur as the man approached the host's stand and was seated at a table near the back. The man noticed him immediately, a smug smile forming on his lips as he watched Jason walk by. Jason could feel the eyes of the restaurant on him, and for a brief moment, the weight of the moment settled in. This was it. He couldn't let this man walk all over him again. The feeling of humiliation from yesterday was still fresh, and in that instant, it was as if time had slowed down. His entire body tensed. The man stared him down, no apology, no remorse in his eyes. He looked down at Jason like he was a bug ready to squash him. Jason's fingers tightened around the tray he was carrying, but instead of retreating into the shadow of the kitchen, instead of turning away, Jason did something he had never done before. He walked directly to the man's table, his heart pounding in his chest. The room seemed to grow quieter as every eye shifted to the confrontation. The same man who had belittled him just the day before was sitting in front of him, but Jason was no longer afraid. He set the tray down gently on the table, making eye contact with the man for the first time. The power had shifted in that instant. "You're back," Jason said, his voice calm but cold. The man's face immediately changed. His sneer was gone, replaced with a look of confusion, maybe even a hint of nervousness. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone dismissive. Jason stood his ground. "I want you to know that this," he gestured to the restaurant, "is not your personal kingdom. I don't care who you are or how much money you have. You don't have the right to treat anyone like that. Not me, not anyone." The man's eyes narrowed. He was about to say something when Jason cut him off. "And don't think you can intimidate me into staying quiet. I've been quiet for too long, but I'm done being invisible. Done letting people like you think you can get away with anything. You don't know what it's like to work here, to be looked down on every day. But you're about to learn." The man opened his mouth, ready to deliver another scathing remark, but Jason's words hit him like a slap in the face. Jason had said exactly what needed to be said, and in that moment he felt the power shift. The customer might have been wealthy, but Jason had something that was far more valuable: his voice. Before the man could respond, Jason turned on his heel and walked away, leaving the table in stunned silence. But he knew something had changed in that brief moment. He had taken his dignity back. He had made it clear that he was no one's punching bag, that no one had the right to treat him as less than human. The feeling of walking away with his head held high stayed with him as he retreated into the back of the restaurant. As the evening wore on, Jason couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet victory building in his chest. It wasn't about being confrontational. It wasn't about causing trouble. It was about something much bigger: the power of standing up for yourself, of speaking truth to power. And as Jason worked the remainder of his shift, his coworkers seemed to take notice of the change in him. The manager came up to him later, after the crowd had thinned out and the restaurant had quieted down. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low. Jason followed him into the back office, the weight of the day's events still on his shoulders. "What's up?" Jason asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said yesterday," the manager began. "I know it wasn't just about that customer. It's about something bigger. About the way this place works." He paused for a moment, looking uncomfortable. "And I want to make it right. We need to do better. I'm going to talk to corporate about making some changes, about diversity training, about creating a better work environment. This isn't the way things should be." Jason was silent for a moment, processing the manager's words. For the first time, it felt like someone was finally listening. The words were small, but they were a start. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of something real. A change. Jason nodded, a quiet sense of hope starting to blossom in his chest. But there was still a long road ahead. As the night drew to a close and Jason gathered his things, he received a message on his phone. It was a notification from a social media platform, a post from the rude customer. Jason opened it, his heart sinking. The man had posted a picture of himself at the restaurant, claiming to have received terrible service from Jason and threatening to ruin his career. Jason's hands clenched around the phone. He had stood up to the man, but now this? Was this the end of his newfound strength, or was this just the beginning of his fight for justice? The stage was set for a showdown, and Jason knew this wouldn't be the last battle. But he was ready. And this time the fight wasn't just for him. The next day, Jason felt a knot of tension in his stomach as he walked into the restaurant. The post from the rude customer was everywhere, on social media, shared by his followers, and even appearing in some of the restaurant's reviews. The customer had painted Jason as the villain, accusing him of being rude, unprofessional, and racist. His post had gone viral, and it was the kind of attention that could ruin Jason's career. He couldn't shake the feeling of anxiety that gripped him. Everything he'd worked for was at risk. How could he have known the man would turn the tables on him like this? The fight he had started, his stand for dignity, now felt like it was spiraling out of control. As Jason walked into the break room, he noticed his coworkers talking in hushed tones. When they saw him, their voices lowered, and their eyes flickered with uncertainty. It wasn't just the customers that treated him like he was nothing. It was the weight of people around him, the ones who wouldn't speak up, the ones who wouldn't stand with him. They were all silently complicit in the system, whether they wanted to admit it or not. But Jason wasn't backing down now. Jason's phone buzzed. It was a message from his manager. The message read, "We need to meet about the customer's post. I've told corporate about it, but I want to make sure we handle this properly. Please come to my office." Jason took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. This was it. His moment to either break or rise higher than ever before. He walked to the manager's office, determined to confront whatever was ahead. Inside the office, the manager stood behind his desk, his expression grim. "I know this isn't easy, Jason," he said, his voice low, "but we're going to fight this. I've spoken to corporate and we're taking action. We can't let this man's lies destroy your career. We're going public with the truth." Jason's heart pounded. He had always felt like an outsider in this world of privilege and wealth. But now, for the first time, someone, his manager, was standing beside him. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They weren't going to let this man get away with lying. They were going to fight back. "We've got support from a lot of the staff too," the manager continued. "We're all on your side. It's time to expose the truth." The days that followed were filled with tension. Jason didn't know how this would end, but one thing became clear. This was a fight he wasn't fighting alone anymore. His co-workers, the people he'd worked with for years, started to step up. They spoke out, gave their statements, and made it clear that the rude customers' accusations were false. The restaurant management took a stand, backing Jason publicly, while the customer's post was shared less and less. Jason's social media exploded with support from people who had seen the truth, people who were tired of seeing others trampled underfoot. As the voices of his supporters grew louder, Jason realized something. His stand wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who had ever been silenced, for everyone who had ever felt invisible, for every black worker who had been dismissed, humiliated, or erased. But then came the moment of reckoning. The customer, seeing his attack on Jason backfire, tried to backpedal. He posted a weak apology, claiming he had misunderstood the situation and didn't mean to damage Jason's career. It was a half-hearted attempt to cover up his actions, but it was too late. People weren't fooled anymore. The public outcry was swift and furious. Many called for the customer's social media accounts to be suspended, and others demanded that the restaurant ban him permanently. Jason, now flooded with support, stood firm. He didn't need this man's apology. What he needed was for the world to see the truth, for people to recognize that this kind of behavior had no place in society. Finally, after weeks of back and forth, corporate made an official statement. They denounced the customer's actions and praised Jason for his professionalism and strength. They offered him an apology for not stepping in sooner. Jason's manager, who had backed him the entire time, was promoted to a higher position as a result of his commitment to standing up for his staff. And as for the rude customer, he was publicly banned from the restaurant, and his social media presence slowly crumbled under the weight of the backlash. He had been exposed, and the people who had supported him were the ones who ultimately turned against him when they realized the truth. Jason stood outside the restaurant after his shift, the cool evening air sweeping through the streets. He took a deep breath, finally allowing himself to feel the relief he had been holding back. His battle wasn't just about him anymore. It was a statement, a victory for all the people who had been silenced, who had been treated as less than. His courage, his willingness to speak up, had brought about change. And that change wasn't just personal, it was something that rippled through the community. Jason had stood up for himself, yes. But in doing so, he had shown the world that people like him, people who had been oppressed, dismissed, and ignored, deserved more. They deserved respect. And more importantly, they deserved justice. Jason's story teaches us all that silence only perpetuates the cycle of injustice. No one should ever feel invisible or powerless in the face of cruelty. Whether it's in a restaurant, at work, or in any part of life, standing up for yourself and speaking the truth is the first step in breaking down the walls of inequality. Change isn't easy, but when we fight for what's right, when we refuse to accept being mistreated, we begin to change the world around us. So ask yourself, have you ever been silent in the face of injustice? Are you ready to stand up and speak out when you see someone being mistreated, or when you are? If Jason's story inspired you to stand up for what's right, if you believe in the power of speaking out and exposing injustice, make sure to subscribe to Racism Exposed. Join us in raising our voices, sharing these stories, and shedding light on the truth that so many try to hide. Together we can make a difference. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the more we stand together, the stronger our fight for justice becomes. Justice has been served. Now let's keep fighting.